welcome to the Improvisors podcast. I'm Kevin Janes, and this is my wonderful co-host, Mr. Neil Thomas.
Thank you very much, Kevin. In this podcast, we talk with improvisers about their histories, their practices, and their aspirations. And today it gives us great pleasure to be in conversation with the wonderful Jonathan SINATRA.
Jonathan describes in detail his ongoing dance project on Instagram,
of which he's clocked up 1,600 consecutive days of performance.
Wow. He also spoke of the particularities of his practice and neurodiversity and the centrality of joy and pleasure in his work.
And the importance for him of creating his own performance platform.
He also spoke of belonging, becoming, and being.
We hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did.
Let's go.
Good morning and welcome, Jonathan SINATRA, to the Improvisers podcast. Kevin and I are completely thrilled to be in conversation with you this morning. So thank you so much for being generous of spirit.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. And Kevin, thank you for inviting me. I'm sort of been excited to be part of this podcast project talking about improvisation.
Great. Maybe we'll start with the question, when did you start improvising?
It's been there from the beginning. I was adopted at a very young age, and my family moved quite a lot when I was younger between continents around town. So I moved schools, and I sort of acknowledged myself later on in life, but having a neurodiversity, always having a sense of dyslexia or learning difficulties. So part of that process of those learning difficulties was to mask oneself, to consider myself intelligent or, have intelligence. So how to sort of communicate, operate, and function in the world with that and mask any difficulties you have in your learning. What is it? Improvisation is the mother of necessity. So it was there earlier on, and that was my survival method. But I think your question probably points to when was the time when I started going, no, I am an improviser. And I would say that's much later on in life, on a couple levels, improvising on a couple ways of working. I'll circle back to that. So at an earlier age, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was, in high school and things. I was sort of just didn't understand that school is a place you learn about learning. So I was just in these environments, in these situations, in these locations, improvising constantly all the time, not learning, improvising, surviving. And then, I got through school, and I was like chubby when I was younger, and I decided, and this is probably pertinent to the type of improvising I do, is I decided to really try to lose a lot of weight. So I was doing a lot of dancing and playing sports and going out to nightclubs and just sort of dancing all night. So I was sort of into not rave culture, but like dancing all night at nightclubs when I should have been studying in year 11 and year 12. And that was what was bringing me joy, what that space was, being in those environments, getting out in the pedestals. And I guess people around me said, oh, you're a great dancer. It's really interesting. And I had never done any formal dance training or anything. I'd say I'm more unconventional. A lot of people that you might interview or come across in the performing arts have done ballet or done a lot of sports or done theater. I was always performing to survive and playing sports because I enjoyed that physicality. And then dancing was this thing I started doing. And then I went off overseas, didn't know, started a furniture design course. I come from a family of architects. So that's another thing I can talk about later on, how environment is really important. I'll say it now. One of the kind of fundamentals that I realized where I'm in my moment of life, and that's been working with a choreographer called Russell Dumas, the concept that, dance is really time, space, and the body. Russell got a thumbs up there, I guess. and, you know, exploring what that time and space and body, I'll speak more to that later on about like where I put my weight in what I do as an improviser on time, space, and body. But to try to continue on the lineage, not the lineage, the linear line of that's the beauty of dyslexia, and people wonder about improvisation, that you can suddenly, you're at a point, you can go anywhere. I'm not in like a theater piece going along a line. So that skill's always there. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that bit where Robin Williams is in the actor's studio and they ask him like, how do you do it? And he just starts, you know, being whatever he's doing. And he's like, I'm not doing, I'm just this is how I am. And so it's taken me a long time to realize people go, wow, you know, you're a natural improviser and you're just doing that. And it's like nature nurtured, you know, maybe I am natural and I've also nurtured it to survive along the way. So, you know, flip me going overseas after I finished high school, and I'm traveling all around on this big adventure, hitchhiking through Europe, you know, back in those days, back in the early 90s. And also that was probably an important time because both of you, and probably a lot of people that have been on the podcast, have come through someone like Al Wonder or that whole generation. And I realized I went to university in the 90s, and, you know, a gentleman came to our university wearing a kilt and a hose pipe, and his name was Andrew Morrish. And he's, you know, I asked him like, what are you going to do? And he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he walked in and performed for us. And then a little bit later on, I was seeing Andrew Morris and Peter Trotman at Green Mill. You have all these contemporary dance pieces on, and they're there. So that is, you know, sending little things off in my mind, like this is a form. But still at that time, I wasn't so interested in improvising as my major form of performance. I was like, I wanted to be an actor, or, you know, no, at that stage, I wanted to be an actor before. I went to the University of Tasmania before I saw Andrew Morrish. And there I discovered contact improvisation. And I'd get roles and I'd have to learn all these lines. And I worked really hard to get this like lead role in this end of year play. And, you know, I did it, and it was quite a lot, but it was so hard for me because you know, I'd be literally going through those scenes. Or at one point we had to do a voiceover thing once. And I'm in the studio, I got this thing to do a voiceover for everyone else. And with the dyslexia, the words are jumping off the page. You know, I'm chasing these things, you know, like, woohoo, there it is, go, whoop, boom, 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 boom. And everyone's enjoying it. They find it very entertaining. For me, I'm just like, you know, like ride this wild beast of this situation. And they're just going, oh, how did you do that? And it's just like, how did I get through that? Is, you know, what's going on in my mind. So I haven't dawned on the idea that improvisation is, you know, the main thing I'm doing. I'm trying to be on this journey to be an actor. But through that, sorry, I jump around back to the story, you know, in these main plays, learning these lines, going through the rehearsals, watching everyone going, oh my God, he's just going everywhere with his lines. Let's do another take. Let's get it right. You know, all these things. And at the same time, in that year, there wasn't so many people at the University of Tasmania in the different courses. So sometimes you'd have to be an extra in someone else's play, and Shakespeare would be on. And so they'd go, hey, Jono, can you be, you know, some trees and some environments and stuff? And I had to be like, you know, trees and things in the back of me moving around. And people would come up to me and said, I saw you in that play last year. You were amazing. And I'm like, oh yeah, I worked hard to try. They go, no, not that one. When you were a tree in the background or something. So, you know, something was tweaking there of, you know, you know, this physical, you know, this physical theater type movement. And I was interested in Grotowski and that sort of theater de complicité and sort of commedia dell'arte. There was John Bolton School, I think, at the time, way back in the early 90s. So all that, those things kind of interest me. And I remember I auditioned for John Bolton at one stage, and I didn't realize, in the acting schools, and I always did well. They said, we really liked you, but I didn't fit in maybe with the year that they wanted. I've, you know, heard that in retrospect. So I didn't get into the John Bolton School. So What is it when you hear about artists, they, they missed an opportunity, but that maybe pushed them on to do what they do. And that's pretty much when we get to talking about my daily dance practice. I think also that has helped myself to nature and nurture myself to survive, and what I enjoy doing, because there's a pleasure in what I enjoy doing. I'm learning now with that neurodiversity of like, I'm fine with who I am and that mind works. And I might be doing lots of things where I'm trying to rein in my dyslexia or I don't know, ADHD patterns or something. But those are guidelines that help me play with what makes sense for other people. So it's that kind of coming into alignment of how my brain works and how how the rest of neurodiversity or typical neurodiversity works. I hope that makes sense. At the University of Tasmania, after being these trees and things, I discovered a form or came across a form, and I love the dance classes, the contemporary dance classes for actors at that stage. But I really got into a form called Contact Improvisation that was there. And also, I was introduced to the early postmodern dance making practices. I guess, I mean, we always think of Steve Paxton as just as a contact improviser, but he was also interested in part of the Judson troupe and making performances, and they were in each other's performances, and those constraints of what they could do were always being explored in many facets. I hope, if that's a history lessons, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but that's the way I see it. And so I went from University of Tasmania over to a place called Victoria University of Technology, and I watched a little bit of Gretel talking about, she was there same time, same place, and Andrew Morris, and there was Jude Walton, and they were mixing theater and dance and postmodern and philosophy. So all these subjects were coming, hitting at you. You had one lecturer that was Mark Mitchington asking, like, if no one's, a bit like, if a tree is in the wood and falls, does anyone hear it? Like, who needs to be there for a performance? And that was a little that went off in my brain. Idiokinetic work was another sort of thing that went off my brain about improvising. And, I've heard some other improvisers talking about like the body, or working from the body as not music, not a technique of ballet or something. We're far beyond that, I think, now. But, working with how the body works from those postmodern people as a form of improvising. And that's, that's me as a growing child developing of boundary making within myself. And then the daily dance of what I do now is a further on extension of that in environments, another aspect of it. But I also came across things like happenings, where you create these things. And I had this vision of everyone in the performance arts course, all the year levels. We did a thing called VFest where I said, oh, I love that little incredible little kind of performance you did. And, you had oranges and you threw them yourself out. And I did a piece with a guy with a bucket. And we talked about, there was someone that used to bring their dog there. And we talked about what we'd do to this dog, a bit like, who's the famous singer from Wangaratta, Nick Cave, talking about, like, he wrote a song where he was early morning by a pool and these people were reveling, making music, and he was like, oh, I could just kill them. And then he wrote a whole song about how many different ways he could kill them. Never happened, but so we had this whole thing about being very angry at this dog by destroying these crates. And I decided to collect everyone together and form a group and have a happening in this old building that was going to be demolished. That was, so we got use of this building. It was incredible. It was in this building, had one of those electrical center links where all the electricity from the area, like, you shouldn't be in those rooms. And, we got the free keys to use the building. It was back in the days with OHS, we're out the window and you could, do anything in spaces, just as long as, the higher abouts didn't know. So we had happenings a couple of years. And in that, a very important value happened to me is I was never gonna, I had that, could have had that side of directing or, getting people to do things, but I'm not going to ask anyone to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And that always was a value or a rule that I would have to go, okay, just got to keep exploring things myself, and not a person with a huge amount of dance technique or little bits of theater technique. That actor in me says, well, I can just start kind of performing dance and then growing through that dance realm. So, that put me on through those years. And at that time, you would have Cubit Street was around. Were you around for Cubit Street? Remember, and Nancy Stark Smith came out from America, and I was kind of good at Contact. And I think she was asked, like, okay, there was Flux, that group Flux, that Martin Hughes and Janice and Llewellyn. I'd gone while I was at VU, I'd gone because I was doing circus classes at Circus Oz because I was in that physicality, but I discovered contact improvisation even more, and that opened me up. And there were groups doing it, but I was always, and contact improvisation, I think, is a wonderful form for me. I might talk about it later. Well, I'll talk about it now where I'm at. Like, I go to jams, and I know sometimes there's the human thing about survival. You tend and friend, you go in and you find your friends and you work with them, or knowing. And I would just sort of go in and always be interested in who came from wherever else, or wasn't interested in that, but I would dance with anyone. I wasn't going to dance with anyone in particular. I was going to see what the dance I have. So I guess that was an extension of improvisation in the everyday and as a performance, because contact improvisation as a performance form. I know Joey and Emily were on here, and that's what they do. It's an interest. I'm challenged by it. I was maybe heard that it's hard to make it a performance form. So I went the other way. And at that same time, you have a lot of people doing. I was I ended up in Sydney. You had people that were doing performance nights at Cubit Street, or those long runs, the Al Wonder style. So I didn't go into that realm, but I went off and started working with Russell Dumas. Or actually, I ended up over in Perth. I ended up working a bit with Circus Oz, ended up in Perth, going to WAPA, and I didn't want to do another 3 years after doing 2 years in Tasmania, 3 years as undercourse. So I did an honors in exploring movement or improvisation, and I was just still playing around. But at that time, I was trying to do as many classes as I could in ballet and contemporary. And for me, coming to dance late, it wasn't something that was just put in my body. Every time I'd have to do it, I'd have to be working out, how do I do this thing called ballet or contemporary? How do I frame it or put it into scores so I could do it? So that sort of kicked me on a fair bit. And I did like performing. So sometimes I'd end up on these kind of improvisation platforms, which I'd like to do more. But I think, Kevin, you and Neil, you've done a lot more of that. I should say I was influenced early on when I was doing that undergraduate, people in shop windows for the arts festivals, the Urban Dream Capsule. So I'd seen someone like Andrew Morsh, and that lot of people then. I went to Perth, did that. I wanted to get overseas and work with some interesting dynamic companies, and I ended up in Sydney meeting Roz Crisp and working out of her studio. And Andrew and Roz were getting together at that time. So Andrew was around in Sydney, and of course Andrew is like, what are let's talk improvisation, let's get together in spaces. And Roz was. And through that journey, I'd heard a guy called Russell Dumas, who, interesting minimalist dance maker. And he's actually very improvisational in the way he works. He's very hones down and gets what he wants, but he's very improvisational in how the work gets played out. And it was based a lot on partnering. And people always say, oh, Russell's postmodern or he's contemporary. And to me, he's a modernist. He actually really works out a language that's unique to him. So he was a great master to work under for a long time. I think of it, he gets another thumbs up there again. He is difficult. We all hear stories about Russell and interesting, but he was, and I think he might be in the realm of neurodiversity. And, he had an understanding of both of us with this kind of thing. So he'd have a lot of people working with him that were there for technique and getting his insights. And he had that brain to keep thinking, not only on what he was doing, but what he was doing in relation to art and art practice. So that expanded my whole world. And and the way he works, incredible. Like he gets bored of, he doesn't want to rehearse it so much. He wants to keep developing and create new work. So you had these you always had to be improvising. And the biggest challenge I found at that time, which is something I'm trying to address now, was how do I improvise or do something, and how do I repeat it so I can be that performer, so that I have that kind of edge going in me? Am I letting that go now, or where is that contained in my body or my practice? Is an interesting question that I keep wondering. And that's where I'm really at the moment, is like, how do people think, or how do they structure what they do? But yeah, so he would, that was challenging, of because a lot of his work we do like 24-minute duets. I don't know if anyone had saw some of that work, and I couldn't tell you what I was doing, but once I started doing it, my body would drop in, and there wasn't any music to it. So you didn't have to be your body in time to a place, and you were dealing with another body, which I think that's the thing I think improvisation and contact brings back to me, is that you can't do it by yourself. I mean, I can improvise by myself, but you are crashing into another body, or moving or touching or in contact or in space with another body that you're responding to or reacting to, that is dangerous in a little way. It's pushing your normal habits to somewhere where they haven't been before. Because it's hard to, I really improvises, it's really hard to change those habits. You have to have incursions. Maybe that's a word I heard from Russell. Necessary incursions was one of his piece. How do you bring something in, which I do all the time? I'm going to learn somatic work. I'm now going to start learning parkour or something for a while. And I always, to get back to that ADHD or dyslexia, I always start on it and get a lot of information on it, but I begin to phase out. There must be that kind of dopamine hit that I have to do things quickly. And that, when I talk, well, I guess I'm talking about the daily practice I do now. I don't spend hours. I do spend hours in spaces or looking at places, and I'm there day after day. I haven't missed a day in almost 1,600 days. And that's been a wonderful thing to hold me into what I do. And it's been a great great practice.
Jonathan, can I just
So, yeah.
step in beside you there as you're heading to that? Because I'm so well, thank you so much for reflecting on your past in such detail. It was just loved hearing that, and loved hearing the sort of the details of your formation, I guess. And I could keep listening to that. But now that you're turning towards your daily dance project,
Mm.
I just want to read something you forwarded to us about that. That you've completed almost 1,600 days straight now of your daily dance practice, and you defined it as a durational video essay exploring contemporary dance practices in uncommon dance locations. And I'm sure there's a lot more that you can add to that, but I'd
Great
love to
question.
use that as a springboard for you to go now into your daily dance practice, and bring us into this remarkable world that you've are committed to, and a world of generative performance that's been going on for 1,600 days.
Yes, bang, into it, launched into it. I can jump springboard into it. And also the bit that I bounce into it, like all those years of working with Russell, we'd be in unusual locations like university basements or people's houses on tour or where have you. So there's always this necessity to work in spaces. There was a dance with a Stuart Shug. I remember we had to warm up before going to the space. And I was like in a mindset. This was a really good thing that blew my mindset. It's like, no, I got to get into that space, because that space holds me and contains me, so I can warm up and everything. He's like, oh, I'm just gonna like roll around on this couch out here before I could get into there. And I looked at that one day and said, yeah, yeah. So often the times with Russell's, I would, be in that work with them for hours, and then people would leave and you'd be in this university space because they're usually on the fringes somewhere. And I'd just keep playing for hours. And I'd been doing that in my university days. Class had finished, I'd be playing in the spaces, because institutions just sort of, they have a lot of space after non-working hours. So I think that's very informing to where I am now. And, I do that for a long time, and I'd be in those spaces just working on things by myself. Russell's work now, it's time for me to do either begin processing his work, or now I'm doing something different and playing, just play spaces. I think when people talk about me, they talk about there's a lot of play in what I do. So, as a little kid, I was always playing around in the backyard or kicking the football or doing something. So that has just continued on into my adult life to bring me a lot of pleasure and joy. Because I haven't been sort of an artist that's trying to climb I like funding, but I haven't tried to climb the funding ladders or be making works. My brother said to me, you weren't a builder. I'm a player. I'm playing with buildings, not building things. Russell was a great person to be under because he was building. He was building his work. And then I had places to play in. So eventually there was a couple studios that we eventually got all kicked out, and Russell, he moved back to Sydney, wasn't doing so much. So now I was going in spaces, playing with the spaces. And then I realized, do I have to be in these spaces anymore? And of course, you could say, when did I become an improviser? When did the daily dance practice happen? Maybe it would have happened 20 years ago if I had mobile phones. The culture we're in now, the YouTube, the Instagram, all that culture, that having that camera everywhere, is a huge thing. I was going to tell a little story about Andrew Morsh. We were working up in Sydney once, and I was improvising with him, and I was shy because Andrew's there sitting watching me, and I was performing, and I didn't mind being seen. I don't know if you talk about ways people perform. You can watch me, and I know you're there, but I don't necessarily engage. Some people have styles of really engaging with the audience, and I'm trying to push my level doing that. But if you look at my daily dance, when you watch them, oftentimes I know the camera's watching me, but I'm not directly. Sometimes I break it, which is interesting. That's me going out of my habit. But Andrew's sitting there watching me. I do this thing for 20 minutes, a half hour. And then at one point in the middle of it, I acknowledge, and he's like, you're seeing me. And he's like, yeah, we're both in the same room. We know we're both here, but you're having this ability not to, not to directly make contact with me, but you're communicating with me. And maybe this daily dance and what I do with the phone is, I'm lucky with that. There's an audience that it has found, but I'm not having to directly. It's interesting when people show up and I have to work with them, or I had to do a day where I had 1,000 and people wanted to come watch it. And that was like, oh my God, it's like, I guess there's stage actors that work on stage and film, actors that just work on film. Because I do have that camera when I'm dancing is my witness, and it's witnessed me, and it might relate to, I don't know if anyone's mentioned the idea of authentic movement, being witnessed, being seen, and being able to go wherever you want, being seen. And that camera isn't going to say, hey man, like, occasionally it talks to me like I don't have battery time and I turn off, or you forgot to turn me on, or things like that. Having to play with, and then now new cameras that can track you. I don't know if you've seen some of my work where like I'm moving and I'm actually just playing with it. There's one where I'm in a forest and it looks like I'm like this drug, because I'm wearing Adidas. I kind of like the Adidas, active wear costume sort of at the moment, playing with that. And, I'm looking at this thing and I'm trying to talk to the drone. So,
what a wonderful thing the dance project is, Jonathan. I scrolled through it, and it's just immense. It's incredible, and it's complex. And I some of them I found kind of profoundly moving. It feels like I'm seeing you, which it's moving, and I feel like you found a form of the time that gives you an ability to express and to kind of sing your particular being. So I guess I just want to say thank you so much for creating that. People should, thousands do, but do yourself a favor if you're watching this, go and check it out on Instagram. And the question I had around that is, besides how do you do it? Like isn't that a weight upon you? Isn't that a difficult project? And how has that unfolded for you over time? as what is it, 1600 ago, those
Yeah.
first days, and just briefly, what have you learned?
No, great questions, Neil. Because you really hit a lot of things that have been part of that journey. And I'll try to address, because a couple markers that you put in there. One thing is markers. Like it's interesting that I have a working process of I enjoy the habits, but I'm probably not so good at goal making in my life. I want to run a marathon. I want to do this or that. But the daily dance project, there's 16, almost 1600 days. I have 16 and 100 because I remember that the car Datsun 1600 Z or something. So, and I've never missed a day, and I have to make the piece on the day. I have a couple manifestos in there. I like the idea of Yvonne Rainer and those people having manifestos. So one thing is I always had to be in it right from the start. Talking at the start, there was a person, we hear about these people doing the challenge, like, can you do this for a year, draw every day for a year? So I had a friend that was making a dance piece every day for a year, and they were a dancer, but they'd been quite sick. They were going through quite a lot of things, chronic fatigues. So their dancing was about, just showing up. Can I show up to my body every day? And that inspired me. Beth, a woman called Beth, inspired me quite a lot. And she was getting toward the end of her year. And I was at a time I was feeling a little bit depressed with a lot of things as a performer, that I had to rely on a lot of other things. And this is one of the things I want people to realize is you don't have to, you can create your own platforms. You can go out and do your own things. What I'm doing halfway along this whole point, realize that I'm doing this for my, I have pleasure out of doing it. I love doing it. But also I haven't just, I was going to say this morning, I thought I'm opening up the door for someone else to do something. I said, no, I'm not. The door has been open already as an improviser before me, with other ways. I just happen to be walking through a door at the moment that I'm holding open, that I enjoy connecting with people going through that door at the same time, and want that door to be seen, someone running down the hallway. It's like, oh, I got to catch that door. So, I see myself, I have that little bit of altruism of this is also for other people. And I think that gets into my psychology of like showing up into the world, like, a sense of importance for other people, a commitment to doing a practice for other people tremendously helps. The circle back around to, so I enjoy, I was falling into all these practices of dancing, being in spaces, doing things, and these habits, but no goals with it. So, in the beginning, I was taking lots of photos. I know there's a bit of photography in there, but I was never in those photos. And then I said, what happens if I start putting myself in it? And this person was winding down their year of improvising, and I started dancing on a couple of their last days as support. And then I went, why don't I, like a relay, just keep doing this? And in the beginning, I was trying to do relations to that person or try to make my work talking to another person. And Instagram for me too, before that, had been taking photographs, and it was not a lot of people were looking at my photos, but I've always found it more interesting for me, like the artist scrapbook, going, oh, look at my photos. I could go through it. It was a place that was, condensing my photos. So suddenly to do this as a video thing began to add up, and to get to finally where I'm saying that goal. I feel like those street performers, when they're like, the big trick is coming up, I'm gonna, and you watch it for a half hour till you get to the trick. The goals now for me is like, oh, can I make 100 days? Can I make a year? Can I make 2 years? Can I make 3 years? And even sometimes I got up to 1,000 days, and in that process, so interesting. There's certain times where everyone was like, oh, 1,000 days, I want to be in your 1,000-day video. Like everyone wants to be on the 1,000-day. That's the story. But the 1,001, the 105, whatever, no one cares. And I've watched myself go through, all of us, the world's going through addictions to phone and things. And I watched myself at the beginning, like, why isn't anyone caring? And then I had to sit there, who am I doing this for? And I am aware when I make work, it is for someone else, but it's also for me. It's this dialogue that I can't even unpack. Some philosophers are probably much better at saying that, but I'm aware of that. And so, I have times when I'm, watch there's more interest and then there's less interest, but I kept going. And, once what really helps me too is, it's a habit. Like some days I got 50 million things going through my life and I go, I still got to make this dance. And luckily I got a good partner that sometimes helps. I won't say sometimes, they help when they can. Sometimes they're in the process, but they have their own life. That's if that makes it. I love you, Min. And you're very supportive, extremely supportive on a lot of things, especially after 1,600 days. But oh, train of thought, where did I go? I go, I got to get this done. I have to get this done today. And there's this anxiety. And also that has also created a really good habit of, because I've worked with some people like, oh my God, you got to make this better. I got to be Schmidt. Because I've had days where I spend like 4 hours, really refining something. And I love if I get a chance to talk about the refinement of it. Because I like when we chatted about podcasts, make it really simple. I don't have a lot of edits in it. There's not like cut up and it's not small. Usually I try to do one take. And if I'm working and I see something and there's a couple things I like, I realize also the shape of what Instagram was. It used to be a minute, then went to a minute and a half. And I'm challenged by, am I making TikTok videos, like just dancing to music? Or am I, I have to be in that dialogue sometimes. And so that had to be a minute. I had to be dancing or doing something for a minute, make something interesting for a minute. Oh, sometimes I could do play for a half hour as an improviser and go, well, what are all the best bits can I stick into a minute? So there's an improvisation of playing with improvisation and then improvising how I get to that. So I wouldn't do video editing in the camera because some people would be like, why don't we just cut it all up? All the bits you've done. It's like, I don't want to spend 10 hours on a phone doing that. I want to edit my body. So that idea of filmmaking or editing, Buster Keaton is a really important person. I like how he talks about, you can have a lot of ideas when you come, but half the ideas, good ideas come while doing something when you're making a film. And people ask me like, how do you come up with ideas every day? And you do. And sometimes I see things and it takes a while to get around to them. Like, oh, I've seen that light. I'll get to that light next week. Or in the beginning, sometimes I do like 5 or 10 great videos. Like there's some days as a photographer or maker, you're on, when you're on and you can just make so many things. And I have to watch those days because I go, yeah, I just made 20 things and people get flooded with 20 things and they don't like that. And then the next day I'm completely tapped, I'm tapped with something that ignites me. I like Jacob Collier, who's a great sort of improvising musician. And he once said, someone asked him, I think he's works hard and he's really in a great space of luxury. He goes like, how do you do what you do? And he goes, I only do what I like doing. And I kind of like that as a something to stick to.
Jonathan, you mentioned right at the beginning 3 words, and I think that was to do with Russell as well: time, space, and body. I'm thinking of the daily postings of your dancers. I think your background as well, coming from background of architects, the in situ dances that you do, the photography background that you have, somehow so much seems to come together in the context of these daily dances. They're beautifully framed. They are capturing place, space, and your participation. There's something remarkable about the ongoingness of, about the quality of the image and connection to place. Can you talk a little about that and how you go about setting up for each of those? You've written a bit about this.
Yes, good question, Kevin. I don't know if I can talk a little bit about it. I might talk too much, but and I'm probably talking really fast. I'm monitoring time, space, and the body. One of the things I could probably have a little bit of time to think about, I think is really solid, is like, let's say if I fall and people ask me, what am I? And I go, it took me a long time to say I'm a dancer. I can act. I could maybe sing, but I'm a dancer. And I think a lot of dance, majority of times you're working with the technique and you're working with your body and what you can do. And I've gone slightly sideways and going, well, if dance is about time, space, and the body, and it's probably about that for all the arts or lots of things, but I'm just going to zero it down to dance to be specific on points. So got my body. What's my body doing space and time? So now maybe I can play with my body in the space and in the time. The Instagram, as I said there, that minute and a half has sort of dictated to what I've done, and it's framed me and makes me, because I have to do it every day. So those are considerations that are set in stone that I have to meet as an improviser all the time, which is a great challenge. I feel like I could be in midst of a lot of people and in a situation and can dance, and things just happen around me. Like at the beginning, you dance and you watch people, you're watching people go by, or things are happening. There's some dances days where there's a guy in the background and you can see him getting closer and closer because I was on his private property. He gave me an earful and I could feel that coming. Or there's days where I go, I don't think I can handle the big world. I want to crawl into this little space in the world. I guess, and that photography also just let me go through the world of looking at places to find and be in. And that might get right back to that sense of the whole child of who am I? Where do I belong? Belong and being and becoming. So I'm finding places I can belong and be and become and develop in. And it's a bit of a mantra. Sometimes people go, well, what are going to do in the space? And you go, well, we'll just start doing something and we'll see what happens. Someone challenged me once. They said, well, if you were a real dancer, you'd just be dancing in front of a wall and we'd be watching your body and technique. That was a really good point. It kind of hit me in the face. And I went, great. Yep. No, I am a real dancer in a different way, or I'm developing with space and time. Yeah. That was circling back around to the process and making of the work, like how it actually happens is really quite interesting because I'm improvising on many layers here. Like some days I gotta go find a space, or some days I know about spaces. And so you find a space, and if I'm with someone else, we play a game like, when we're both happy with the space, we'll choose that one. So there's a certain sense of joy that will decide. And I love it when I'm with someone else, they go, oh, let's try this space. And I go, I don't tell them if I've done it before or not. And there's spaces I'm returning to again, especially during COVID. There's only so many spaces near you can be in. But, it's setting up the camera angle. That's usually a good thing to sort of get right. And I'm also challenged by how I put myself in frame all the time and playing with that as an improvisation each time, although I often end up as a center thing, but I'm aware of that as a performance maker of where I am on the screen. I had one person I worked with that challenged me. It's like, I don't want you to just set the camera up and just dance in the frame. So then I was just like, drop the camera. And that happened in my photography. Sometimes I'd get shots where it accidentally went off and framed. And I was like, wow, that's great. So sometimes I put the camera down. Okay, I'll start dancing and look to go, oh, that's not a bad frame. And I'll work with it. So the tools told me, I just dropped it and it's been that what is it? The data, it's just random. And then I just work from the randomness. Other days I have shots I set up. But also some days I really feel like dancing. I'm pushing what I want to do physically. Other days I might be a little bit tired and I can go, okay, how do I visually make this really beautiful and be of service to the visual? So I have two, ways of playing with that. Then you get to the next level. You got time. All right. I set myself usually a task of at least a half hour, like dance for a half hour. And I push myself sometimes, in improvisation. I don't know if both of you, when you're kind of practicing that performance in front of people, which is direction I want to get to more in my life. You go, oh, I can go for 10 minutes. And then your consciousness comes, you go, oh, wow. At about 10 minutes, I go, I've got to stop this improvise. You have certain times you can push it to 20. So I've watched myself and I'm about trying to push myself to 30 minutes, but usually around 10, 11, 12, I have this sense that, oh, maybe I should check the camera now or something, make sure it's on. That's a big thing. I've had many ones that didn't get caught and then I got to go remake it. So that's another replaying with technology. And then I have the whole thing of just finding that minute and a half, and then it's dropping music on it. So I go through like a movie making process, but it's also been a dance making process. It also has been a just being a person process. I'm interested in where this takes me in opportunities, projections and things, or working with people. And one thing that people will see on my link all the time is I do ask people to dance with me. And I'd like more of the contemporary dance world or theater world or professional world to come into this world and be in play. But I'm also interested in, whoever, when I put it out, whoever comes. And that is, I think, improvisation. You don't know who you get, someone shows up, or you might have a sense, but if you know the people or something. But I put that opportunity out there because that challenges me, and when we get together and meet, we hopefully I'll be doing this on for longer, and this podcast can sit there and say, hit me up, no matter if you want to make a film or me wear a costume. That's an improvisation challenge, to work with what is presented. And I guess that is maybe at the heart of improvisation, or that's why I realize I'm an improviser, is presenting up to something and being and doing with something in time, space.
Jonathan, thank you so much for today. It's been a really rich reflection to be present to. You occupy, I think, a very particular place in the improv world, and really occupy that with integrity and with purpose, and as an explorer. It's so wonderful to have you on the podcast and to actually have insights or have look at that. Look at that.
Technology improvising with us.
How perfect. Jonathan, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Neil. Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't, that was not set up at all. That was incredible. Yeah.
I just think it's so lovely to hear you unpack your process, Jonathan. It's inspiring. It's truly it's wonderful and generous.